I would do that. I don't want to get sued.
No, it's no trim off at the beginning.
Huh?
Didn't trim off at the beginning.
Make a share out of it.
We're waiting for some people, but you can start. I mean, some people.
We can wait if you. What time do we have until? Just so I know. Time stoppage.
People stay till 2. It really depends how rowdy the bunch is.
Bob sent a big WhatsApp chat.
Huh?
Bob started like a new WhatsApp chat and told like a bunch of new people. It seems like.
It was a new chat. I wasn't sure how that came out.
I don't know.
I don't know the first time I saw it.
It was like odd. Bob started like a new WhatsApp group yesterday
For what?
to let people know about this.
When I heard about Bob, you might want to be here for the Hakdama.
I'm not
There's
sure
a
why
recorded
he.
Hakdama. For
You
things
could
that I
ask
heard
Bob
he
why
He
he did
even
that.
replied to my message.
Does Bob know where?
I didn't understand what he was saying. Do you understand what he was saying?
Do you mind, Bob?
Was that like a mistake?
Are you on the new chat, Sylvia?
I wasn't added to it.
That he. Maybe you guys weren't added. He added something called Lunch and Learn.
Oh, no.
What?
Bob started a
I don't
new
think I
WhatsApp
have
chat
either.
yesterday called What's Lunch and Learn,
I
and
think he just invited you.
He started competing.
it seems like it might be the case. But he sent the flyer for today.
He was proud that he could do it. They figured out how to do it.
But he said he included people on it. Like,
Does he send you now with the edits in the document?
Yeah.
He's so proud of himself. He's like, finally figured out how to run mine.
You know the guy from the sunglasses store, Warshaw?
Mm-hmm.
He's included on this Lunch and Learn WhatsApp, just as an example.
Alright.
The more the merrier.
Yeah, you know, what would culture is coming?
Maybe I'll tell the stories first, and then we'll do Hakdama when people get here. But just to see what you think about the stories. And these are real stories, Maisim Shahaya. It's a good case. Okay. So, Kachaya, this is what the story was. An individual went into a store to buy a pair of pants. And he says he's size 32. They give him a 32, perfect fit. Okay, it's a little long, but everybody knows you got to go and hem the pants, so no big deal. So he buys these pants, size 32. And then he says, these are such great pants, give me 5 more pairs. So they give him 5 more pairs, and he leaves the store. 5 pairs in the package, right, or whatever, they were wrapped up, and the one that he tried on. So he takes the one that he tries on, and he goes to a tailor to get him hemmed. So he tries on the pants that he tried on, and the guy hems them, and he says, take these other 5 and hem them the same way that you hem this one. Good? People have done that before?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so then he gets home, and after he gets through the first pair of pants and he sends them to the dry cleaner, he puts on the second pair, and he can't even close them, like not even close. And then he tries on the next one, he can't even close them. He looks at the tag, 28, not even close, right? All other 5 pairs were size 28. So he brings it back to the store, and he tells them, you guys gave me 28, I ordered 32. They said, well, of course we're gonna exchange them for you, no problem. So they pick up the pants, and they notice that all these size 28 pants are hemmed. And they tell him, we can't sell these pants again. You can't hem the pants and then bring them back. And he said, what are you talking about? You guys gave me the wrong pants. I tried on one pair, told you to give me the other ones, and I can assume they're exactly the same. And I don't have to check every pair of pants. It's not my obligation. That's your job, not my job. And they say, yeah, but you can't return them once you've hemmed them. We can't sell them. What do you want us to do? Who has to suffer the loss?
Good question.
In secular law, what happens? I'm curious if Basin's any different. But
Who has the risk of loss? The seller? I don't know.
Fraud and factor, maybe.
It could be no.
UCC provision.
Yeah, that's the question if they knew.
Right. We're assuming they didn't know. They made a mistake also. It wasn't
The store.
purposefully they had too many 28s and they just...
no, 100%. They made a mistake. Yeah, they had no idea.
If the difference was that he would have tried it on first, so we would say you should look before you try to put it on and wear it, or you would have noticed right away.
Noticed, yeah.
The question is, he's handing it off to somebody else, and they're giving a change first. So he'd already didn't have an opportunity to check, or not that he would have been expected to have that opportunity. Like, what if he would have told them, cut him out entirely? I want 5 more and ship it right to the tailor. So then you would remove any kind of opportunity to inspect requirement.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Does that make a difference? Did he have? I mean, that's what it would come down to. Did he have an
Yeah,
option?
I would say if I had to decide, it's the seller's.
Seller's mistake.
Seller's, yeah, their risk.
Well, caveat it before. Buyer beware.
I guess, but. Is that halacha? Caveat term?
No, he's
No, we're saying American law.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay, so that's gonna be one case we'll deal with. But okay, so I guess if not everyone's here with the Hagdama, we can start with the Hagdama. But I think it's really important anytime someone gives a shiur on Chosh and Mishpat to give a Hagdama as to what it is that we're learning. First of all, I just want to thank the law firm for sponsoring this program in general that we have in the Kollel. I don't think, maybe you do realize because that's why you started the program, but there's tremendous ignorance when it comes to business halacha in the Jewish world. It's very interesting that we've had so much learning and initiatives and things that have started and almost none that are focusing on business. Certainly not in out-of-town places. Maybe in Lakewood they have, the Chosh Mishpat, Kolim, but outside it really doesn't exist. And among Rabbanim, even more so. You get, Chosh Mishpat shilas, you pass them on, as quickly as possible because you don't want to just guess. You have a little background here and there from Nezikin, things that you've learned in the past, but you don't really know. And it's tremendously helpful to create the awareness, not just for the rabbis, so that we can at least let the Kehillah know, but I've already given multiple shiurim to my Kehillah on Chosh Mishpat, and they're blown away that these things exist. They think that, the Torah just talks about, oxen and cows and sheep, and they don't realize it applies to Amazon sellers and all these things because there was never an active official based in South Florida that was, in a major way affecting the community. Hopefully they'll have one, or that the ones that exist will grow. But it's really amazing how many people now know that when you create a contract, it should be halachically enforceable, and all the small changes that need to be made. So I think it's very, very important. It's an amazing, amazing idea. Yaacov for creating it. Okay, now when you have a shiur with lawyers, when it comes to
Bobby came right after.
What? I
Later.
came after what?
Right after he thanked you.
Thank you.
No, you're welcome.
So gracious. Yeah, appreciate the initiative. Thanks so much. Nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you. Thank you for
Well,
coming.
so-
Thanks for having us. Yeah.
What? Yeah. Awesome.
Okay, just in time for a very important introduction. I think super important introduction. So when you give a shiur to lawyers that are dealing in secular law all day, so you have to realize when you come to a shiur in halacha, so there's a seismic shift that's going to take place. Although it's also going to be logical and it's a legal system, there's many peculiarities and anomalies you find in halacha that seem like they don't make sense or that they're unfair. Like straight up unfair, especially when it comes to capital punishment. The level of confidence you need to actually put someone to death. We don't really have a prison system in halacha. So to put someone to death is so high that it says that if there's any court that kills one person every 70 years, then they're a bloodthirsty beis din. Because it should be so difficult to put someone to death. You need two witnesses to be there to witness it, not only to witness it, but to warn the perpetrator before he carries out the act that what he's about to do is forbidden according to the Torah, and the punishment, and he'll be put to death if he does so. He needs to acknowledge that he understood, and then needs to go through with the act. So you can imagine how unlikely it is that anyone will ever be put to death in Torah law. So you basically have a bunch of murderers walking around, and we can't control anything. So why is that? Why would we do that? It doesn't make any sense. Furthermore, maybe you start it like this. David HaMelech says in Tehillim, Umishpatim bal yadaum. When he's talking about non-Jewish court systems, and the non-Jewish nations that have a commandment to set up a court system, he says, and their laws, mishpatim, our laws are not known by them. Now there's two types of halachas in the Torah. There's called a chok and a mishpat. A chok is something that's illogical, doesn't make any sense, like purity and impurity, things that are beyond human logic, they're more spiritual. And then there's something called a mishpat, which should be what we generally define as logical commandments. Don't steal, don't murder, respect your parents, right? Things that are called mishpatim. Now the problem is, David HaMelech said, "Umishpatim bal yadaum." The mishpatim of the Jewish people, so the non-Jewish nations can't understand them, and that's strange. It shouldn't have said that. It should have said, "Chukim bal yadaum." They don't understand our chukim, our spiritual laws that don't make any rational sense. It shouldn't have said they don't understand our rational laws. These are the rational laws. They're supposed to make sense. So why is it that our laws don't make sense and that you can kind of poke holes in them sometimes and say, well, the secular system's better? So you should know that the secular system is also a mitzvah. There's a Noahide law of non-Jews that they should set up a court system. And the American judicial system is probably the greatest court system in the history of the world. Secular court system, man-made. The greatest man-made court system in the history of the world. It's so developed, it's had so much history, so many cases have gone through it. It's also building off of other judicial systems. So it's very, very developed, it's very advanced.
It builds off of Talmud.
Off of what?
The Talmud.
How much law? Yeah, Torah law, yeah, and it builds off of British law. I'm sure it's borrowing from nations that existed before America. So it's very, very developed. So just to give an example, I'm sure you're all lawyers, this is the extent of my legal knowledge, secular legal knowledge. What is the burden of proof in a criminal case? So, beyond a reasonable doubt. What is the burden of proof in a civil case? A preponderance of the evidence, so more likely than not. Okay? So why is there a difference? If beyond a reasonable doubt is a threshold for burden of proof, so why does it just have to be a preponderance of the evidence in a civil case, just more likely than not? Why shouldn't it be more likely than not that this guy murdered this other person, or that he stole from him, or that he assaulted him, and then we should put him in jail? Let's keep society safe. If you're going to extract $1 million from someone, so you should be able to put him in jail. If you think that he's guilty.
One judge said that it's better that 1,000 guilty people go free than one innocent person be in prison.
The 1769 doctrine of William Blackstone. See, I did my Wikipedia homework. He said 10. The thousands, I don't know if he would go with 1,000, but he said 10. Better that 10 guilty men go free than one innocent man goes to jail. So therefore, we have a very high threshold of certainty before we send someone to jail, beyond a reasonable doubt. It can't be just 51%. It's got to be a very, very high likelihood that this person is guilty, because we don't want to send an innocent person to jail. In a man-made legal system, there's one weakness, is that you don't know the truth. You don't really know what happened. You have a court that's trying to determine what happened. Some cases it's pretty clear, maybe it's on video, but even then there's many times that you don't see the whole video, you don't really see what's happening. Cases have been overturned, it's not the same guy, right? You don't really know. So we have to create thresholds of certainty. In the Torah, so we can have absolute certainty. You need to be 100%. Two witnesses have to be there, they have to warn him, he has to acknowledge that he heard the warning, and then he has to kill a person, and only then do we put him to death. Anything less than that, he goes scot-free. Even if you saw him go into a cave, the Gemara says, with a knife, and he goes chasing a person, and then he walks out of the cave covered in blood, holding the knife covered in blood, and you go into the cave and there's a dead body, he goes free. There's nobody to witness it. Nobody knows exactly what happened. You can't be 100%, you be 99%, but we don't kill people on 99%. So
in the American legal system, Anglo-American legal system, it's not only the physical act of murder that we're addressing, it's also the level of responsibility. In other words, if someone is psychotic and they feel that they're not stabbing someone, they're stabbing a sack of potatoes, that's having a delusion. That's someone that we don't punish either, because they don't have a mens rea or a guilty mind. So it's not only the physical act of doing something, it's the responsibility for the act that we punish.
That's a good point, and that's another burden that's placed upon the jury or the court to determine that as well. You can't know for sure. Okay. But when you have a divine legal system, it's not man-made, it's God-made. So there's a safety net, and this is important in all the halachas that we're going to learn. There's a safety net. Anytime you have a court case, there's a safety net. The court is not the ultimate determination of justice. They're not the ones that actually carry out the justice, even in most cases. God does. We believe that God runs the world. We believe that God controls everything. So therefore, all we're doing is fulfilling our responsibility to create the best functioning society we can. But our burden of proof can be placed at absolute certainty. Absolute. You know what? The secular system would like to do that as well, but they don't want to let murderers walk around. But you know what? We could let murderers walk around, because guess what's going to happen to them? God will take care of them. God's going to take care of them. If there's money that cannot be extracted in a halachic court, but it could be extracted in a secular court, so you might be bothered by that. Well, the American legal system is very logical, and if we could get the money out of the person in that court, why can't we do it in the halachic court? It's not fair. Well, because we believe that we have a safety net. God gives us a system of absolute certainty, or higher certainty than you would have in a secular system, because it's not man-made, because God is the safety net. So if this person is supposed to get that money, he's going to get that money. If he's not supposed to get that money, he's not going to get that money. You can't help or hurt him in a Jewish court. His ultimate net money that he's going to take home is determined by God. It's not determined by man. So you're fulfilling a responsibility to create a functional society. So our court system is based on principles that you can't put into a man-made system. So when you compare the two, so when we walk into this office for lunch and learn, it's not another legal shear. You go to you're getting credits, right? So they really shouldn't get credits, because this legal system doesn't follow.
Scrub this part of the video.
It's not going to follow the same pattern of logic that a secular system would, for a good reason, because we have the God safety net. And it was given to us by God with that safety net in place, intentionally put there.
I guess it's a stupid question, but why have a legal system at all? If you're trusting in God to do the ultimate justice, why does man have to have a legal system? Why can't we just leave everything to God?
So he wants a functional society. I said even in the secular system, there's a mitzvah, there's a commandment to have a court system, because it creates a functional society. It creates a fear of doing what's wrong, because you may have to go to a court system. Not everyone believes in God. Not everyone is afraid of God, unfortunately. So because of people that will not necessarily subscribe to the system, so you can't make it purely a divine system, because God wants a functioning society even for people that don't necessarily subscribe to the halachic system. So you need that. But you can have a very high level of certainty, because God is not worried about the fact that the court's going to get it wrong. They don't get it wrong. He says you have to be 100% sure. If I'm going to let you, a human being, take money from someone or kill someone, then I'm going to make sure you do it with certainty. Because God has certainty no matter what. He doesn't need proof. He doesn't need witnesses. He doesn't need anything. He doesn't need a court case. He doesn't need arbitration. He knows exactly what he's doing. So because of that, I think it's always going to be hard to ask questions from a secular system onto a divine system. And they're good questions, and they're probably correct. I mean, you have to understand, the secular system is correct if it was a completely rational man-made system. But because it's not, so you just can't, it's comparing apples and oranges. It's just not the same thing, even though it sounds like the same thing, because even the secular system has a lot of logic behind it, a lot of logic, and everything has to make sense. But if it has something that you seems unreasonable, it's only unreasonable if God's not taking care of things behind the scenes. But if he is, so it's actually preferable, right? According to the William Blackstone doctrine. He even wanted no innocent man to be put in prison. So you know what? We can actually guarantee that. Because in a Jewish court system, you'll never have someone be put to death if he's not guilty. It's impossible. You need two witnesses. I mean, unless you have false witnesses, okay, it's possible. But it's impossible if you have people telling the truth, witnesses in terms of what they saw. Okay, so that's the background. Okay, now we're going to get into back into rational law, and I'm not going to use the God safety net in anything that we're going to speak about, but it's just important to keep in mind, I think, when you approach halacha and Torah. Okay, so I mentioned a story, so I'll quickly just review the story. Someone bought a pair of 32 size pants. He tried them on. They fit perfectly.
So you think who's right? Yeah, he's going to tell a story.
Tell us who's right, yeah. So a guy buys a 32 size pair of pants. They fit perfectly. He says, give me 5 more, and they give him 5 more. And he goes to get them hemmed because they're a little bit too long. And he gets them all hemmed. He gets home. When he starts trying on the pants, he realizes that all of the other 5 that he bought are size 28. They don't fit whatsoever. So he brings it back to the store, and he tells the store, here, take back the pants. And they said, of course, we'll exchange them immediately. They look at them and they say, wait a minute, you hemmed these pants. We can't sell these anymore. So he says, yeah, but that was your mistake. And they said to him, well, you should have checked it before you go and hem pants. You should look at the size. It's an honest mistake. We didn't know, but you can't give us damaged goods for us to resell. We don't have to take the loss. So who is correct in that case? That's a real case that happened.
I think my opinion would be that the store is correct.
The store is
correct?
Yeah.
You can't give back damaged merchandise.
Right, because the guy wasn't careful. He didn't respect the property of the store. So he was reckless, he took a chance, and he damaged the store's goods.
Wasn't the store also reckless and gave him the wrong pants?
Well, yeah, but that could have been fixed by the store taking back the pants and giving him the right pants. But he went a step further and altered the goods. And once you alter it, you know, I think that the store is good.
So you're saying it's improper for the customer to have relied when he said, give me 5 more of these that I'm trying on. He shouldn't have relied on them having accurately done that before going and getting them.
No, I think that when you do business, of course he relied on it, he took it home, but I think that when you do business and you're involved in economic consequences with another party, you also have a burden to be careful.
Let me ask you like
and had
this.
he been careful, it wouldn't have happened.
Let me ask you like this. What happens if the guy didn't check? What happens if the actual label in the pants had a different size? He didn't check, so he had no idea what size was there.
Oh,
But the label had the wrong size.
Even if he would have
And
checked.
that's-
Even if he would have checked, it wouldn't. Then he would.
In that case, the customer would be right, because you can only check so much. I mean, it puts an unreasonable burden on them.
But he didn't. He could have tried them on. Saying at what point of checking? I mean, I asked the store for the same size. Why should I think the store's not giving me the right size?
Because one case is being reckless, and the other case is being prudent. You check the size, and then you proceeded. That's reasonable.
You're honing in all on the correct points. Very good, very good. Let's see where we're going to go with this. So I'm going to give the cases, and then we'll have the halachic tools, and then we'll take the tools and apply them back into the cases. So another story. This is a story that happened close to 1,000 years ago. A real story. We have it in writing. That there was 2 individuals that owned property and wanted to have a deal made between the 2 of them. So Reuven is the first guy. Reuven shows a bunch of houses to his friend Shimon, and Shimon says, I'd like to buy those houses. They happen to have been on vacation. Let's say they're on vacation in South Florida together, and they go back to Brooklyn. Okay, and then like all good Jews that live in Brooklyn, they want to buy some property in South Florida. So he says, okay, I want to buy those houses. They say, okay, fine, we'll buy the houses. Closing 30 days. Okay, 30 days later, closing takes place. Shimon buys the houses. He goes back down to Florida the next week to check them out, and he sees they've been terribly vandalized. And through the camera system, they find out it was vandalized during that 30-day closing period, between the time when they agreed on the deal and when they actually closed the deal and the ownership was transferred.
Look at the contract.
Well, yes, let's say the contract. Okay, yeah, we're going to have another hakdama, very good. Another introduction. Whenever you're dealing with halacha, you're dealing with the cases where things were not necessarily specified. Today, with contract law, if it's a halachically enforceable contract, you have a lot of the clauses and a lot of the situations spoken out. Who's responsible at what point? Halacha deals with more verbal agreements or agreements that don't necessarily speak out every detail, and we want to know what is the correct thing to do in this case. So it wasn't spoken out.
The first step is to sue the attorney. For not putting the clause in.
No attorneys back then.
In general, the owner of the property is responsible for its care and maintenance. So until title transfers, the owner of the property would be the one that's responsible.
Very good. So the one who bought it is going to say, I wanted to buy whole properties, not damaged properties. So the Reuven, the one who sold it, says, I'm for sure going to fix the property, or I'll give you the money, but the sale is going to go through. And Shimon says, no, the sale's not going to go through, because I didn't want to buy property that was damaged. He says, I'll fix the damages. And he says, I don't care. I don't want to buy them. I want to back out of the sale. Maybe in the interim something changed in his personal life. He doesn't want to buy it anymore. He doesn't like Florida. It's too hot. So he changed his mind. So can he back out of the sale at this point? So that's what we're discussing today. Okay,
Would he fix it by the closing date?
No, closing already happened. He only came down after closing was done, and he sees that the damage was there when closing took place. That's also an important caveat.
I think it also depends on whether or not the property could be restored to its original condition. I would say if the property could be restored to its original condition, then he should have to close.
I think the courts use the term reasonable time.
Yeah, a reasonable time, correct.
Okay, good, very, very good. Last case. There is a contractor that's building townhouses, and he's building it in a community where he knows the prices are only going up. They're only going up. So somebody buys it on paper. He says, I deliver the house to you, and you deliver me the money in 1 year. At the end of the year, the person who's buying it delivers the money, and he goes in and looks at his apartment, his townhouse, and the kitchen has 4 different types of cabinets that were hodgepodge together to make his kitchen. This actually happened. And basically the contractor had some leftover materials. He didn't feel like buying a kitchen that matched, and he put all that in there. So the buyer goes to him and says, you have to fix my kitchen. And again, let's assume this wasn't specified in the contract. He says, you have to fix my kitchen. And he says, look, if you don't like the kitchen the way it is, give back the house. Nullify the sale. I'll let you walk out right now. Well, guess what? Right now the property is worth $100,000 more than it was a year ago when they started to buy it. right? So he says, give it back, but I'm not fixing it. I'm not fixing it. This property's worth $100,000 more than when you paid for it. You're coming out on top no matter what. To fix it's going to be $20,000. I already let my workers go home. They're not here anymore. It's going to be a big. I'm already on to my next project. I'm not taking care of it. If you want to give it back to me, I'll give you all of your money back, with interest. Okay, they're not. No, they're Jewish, so they can't do the interest. But what?
That happens all the time.
Yeah. So if you went to a Beis Din, so what would they tell you? Does he have to fix this defect?
I would say yes.
He would have to fix it. He would have to fix the defect. Okay, but he can't nullify it. Okay, so fine. Now let's get into the actual halachas that discuss all of this. There's a very broad area of halacha called mekach taos. Mekach means a transaction. Taos means a mistake. Mistaken transaction. What does it mean? It means where there was a transaction that took place with a certain understanding as to the quality or the condition of the product, whether it's real estate, whether it's a house, whether it's a movable good or a car. And when you get that product, you find out that there was a defect. There's what's called a mum, a blemish. There's a blemish in the product, and you want to nullify the sale. You want to nullify the sale. So are you allowed to nullify the sale? So the halacha is, and this nobody argues on. This is, and we're going to have to add all the details and the caveats and fill in all the blanks. But the rule is in Torah law that in this case, if it is what society would deem to be a material defect, so then it can be nullified. The transaction can be nullified. The buyer gets his money back. The seller.
At the choice of the buyer, though.
At the choice of the buyer. We're going to see it's going to be a little bit of a machlokus on that one. But let's assume only dealing with the buyer now. At the choice of the buyer, that's probably the simplest understanding. But the buyer can say, give me my money back, you take your product back, and that's the end. Can the buyer tell the seller, I want to keep the product, but I want you to give me back prorated what the value of the object is now. Give me back 10% because it's damaged. So the seller has the right to say, no, either you give back the product and I'll give back the money, or you keep it the way it is. The seller has a right to say you can either nullify that transaction or have it go through, but you can't force me to pay back pro rata whatever the damage was. Okay, that's the most basic halacha called mekach taos, and that everybody agrees to. Now, what is defined as a defect, as a mum? Something that is material enough that we can apply this law and nullify the deal altogether. So how do we define that? So it's very interesting. A lot of times halacha, Torah law, will say it depends on the minhag hamadina, whatever's normal in that society at that time. Whatever people say is normal. Whatever people would find this to be a material defect, and you would then be able to return it, and the seller would have to take it back, that's what's defined as a defect. Anything less than that, that would not be called a defect. So it's a little bit difficult, because in our customer service society, where the customer is always right, sometimes it's not a real defect that if you're in like a marketplace between two regular neighbors that would sell things to each other, would everybody agree that you can give it back? Today you can give back anything. You can give back even something that's perfectly intact, and you just say, I don't like it, you can give it back, and they'll take it back in 2 seconds. You can even use it for a while in some stores and give it back totally used and get your money back. So do we even take that into account? So the answer is no. We shouldn't take that into account, because that minhag, that tendency of that society is not really based on whether the item is defective or not, and that's not defining if it's defective or not. That's just called customer service. That's because they want to make more money in the long term. So they say that if we build up a reputation where we'll take back anything, so then we'll make more sales in the long term, and then they go out of business like Bed Bath & Beyond. Right? Doesn't always work out for them, but that's the mindset. So that was never that minhag, that normative practice in that society wasn't actually defining the defect. We want to know what is the normative practice that defines a defect. Okay, so let's assume the store doesn't have a great return policy, and it's just the store doesn't. They're going out of business in a week, so they really could care less if people are going to buy from them in the future. But they're honest. Okay, so sometimes you have a defect that if you were there in the store, you'd say, switch it out, give me a new one. It's got a scratch or a dent. Right? There's scratch and dent stores, right? So that means someone sent it back for a scratch or a dent. So the guy's like, it's a washing machine, it's got a scratch in it. So you say, most people, when they buy a new washing machine, don't buy it with a scratch in it. If you do, you get a discount. That's called a scratch and dent store, right? So which means if you buy it brand new, you should be able to give it back. But most people, once it's delivered to their house and installed, right, they're not going to give it back for a scratch. It's got to be a material defect that actually affects the functionality of the washing machine before they're going to give it back. So which threshold is called a defect, a mum? Is it that you'd give it back when you were right there with the person, and he would take it back, and everyone would do that, because there's certain defects that if you're there in the store, a lot of people would give it back. And then there's certain defects that once you take it home, so you wouldn't return it. Once the transaction's done and you took it home, you wouldn't return it, because you'd either be embarrassed because it's such a small thing, I don't want to make a big deal, or it's not worth my time.
But if you're in the store, why would you buy it if it had a defect, if you actually see it?
No, you saw it after. You bought it, they're loading it up onto the truck, and you say, there's a scratch on it, give me the other one, give me that one. Switch them out, swap it. It's only after the transaction takes place. We're always, in Mekach Tos, we're always saying the transaction took place.
Why can't it be both? Depending when you realize the toast, then you can act on it.
Because we want to determine. Okay, let's. It's a good point. Let's take one step back and understand what's the svara, what's the understanding or the mechanics behind Mekach Tos. How does this work that you can nullify a transaction? Like, what's it based on? When you have halacha, you always want to understand the mechanics, because there's going to be different practical nafkaminas. Different.
If it goes to the heart of the deal. In other words, if it makes the thing that you're buying, you can't have the use and enjoyment of it because of the defect, then I think it would be able to nullify the transaction.
So how is it built into the transaction? That's maybe what I'm saying by the mechanics. There's two major opinions as to how this operates. One is Rabbi Kiva Eger. Rabbi Kiva Eger says that's defining what the mum is. Rabbi Kiva Eger says there is an implied tanai, an implied condition in every transaction, that I'm buying this on condition that it's free of defect. It's built into the transaction. So even if I didn't specify that I have the right to return it with a defect, right? We're talking about in halacha, these halachas, we always want to know what's the halacha if nobody said anything. They just shook on it and took it. Good faith, yeah, perhaps, yeah, good faith. It's built in. I have a condition that I don't want to buy it with a material defect. Okay, that's one way of looking at it. Another way is the Beis Halevi. He says something a little more radical, and there's going to be very big practical differences, and we don't have a consensus of exactly who's right, because it doesn't tell you in the Torah like why it is or how the mechanics work. You have to understand it going backwards. They bring proofs, each of them. So the Beis Halevi says, you know how it works? Because that was not the object I agreed to buy. So when I acquired that object, that was like you replaced, I wanted to buy a soccer ball and you put a football into the box. I didn't buy a football. That's not what I bought. We never had a meeting of the minds on this product. This was not what I bought. Nothing ever happened. There was never a transaction. In halacha, there's something called a kinyan, an acquisition. It's a big deal. When you acquire something, it means it's now yours. I never acquired this because my mind was never intending to acquire that item with that defect. I wanted a whole car. I didn't want a car with a broken engine. So that was not the car that I bought, so nothing ever happened. So it's not like I bought it and there was a condition that I can activate if I so choose. It was an implied condition. It's that I never actually bought that item. One big difference is...
the other one is that he bought it and he's nullifying it. This one he never bought it.
Yeah, he's bought it and it's built and he's nullifying it. What's a big difference? Who owned it in between? Something happened to it in between. So according to Kiva Eger,
that's the pants and that's the
we're going to apply. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of different pieces. But right, did I own the car and I have a clause that I can activate to give it back? In which case, if something happened to it in between, until I activate that clause, I own it. Or is it that I never actually bought that car? So you kind of gave it to me as I gave you money, so that was really a loan retroactively, because I wasn't paying for anything. I gave you the money, and you gave me what's called a mashkon, collateral. Right? That car was collateral for my loan. That's how we would look at it backwards, of what happened.
Yeah, in American law, the concept is void versus voidable.
Yeah.
If something's void from the outset, or if it's merely voidable by one of the parties.
Yeah, but in that situation with the property, he didn't actually take title to it, so that wouldn't make the distinction.
Which property?
When we were saying the property, and during the closing period, something happened.
Yeah.
So then it wouldn't make a distinction between these two things, because either way, he didn't actually take the title.
No, he did take title.
In that case, he
did.
did.
They closed. He bought the house, and he went back down a week later to Florida to check it out, and then he saw it was vandalized.
When they made a agreement for the sale, at that point there was no transfer of title.
Yeah.
The transfer of title.
Yeah.
Only
Oh, you're saying you make it. Once everybody agrees in that case that the damage took place before he owned it. The question is, can he back out of the sale now? That's a different question.
So
Yeah.
it would be,
Yeah. So okay. So that's very, very important. Now there's no consensus opinion, and within each opinion there's like 4 opinions of how to understand each opinion. So that's not the focus today. I don't think we necessarily need that, but that's important to keep in mind just as to how these rules operate. Okay, so that's in terms of defining the level of the mum. And like I mentioned, is it defined when you're in the store, when you come home from the store? A good question is if the seller knows that there's a scratch on the washing machine, but the buyer doesn't know it. Can he sell it to him intentionally, knowing that when the guy takes it home, he's not going to return it? Because let's say that we say that, and there's a diuk, there's an inference in the Shulchan Aruch, that says that the definition of a defect is that someone would return the item, meaning take it home, find the defect, and return it. That's the inference from the Shulchan Aruch, the way it's written. It says machzir es hamekach. After you took it home, you find the mum, and then you return it. So it's not that I would just exchange it while I'm there before it happens. It means you have to really care about it, that you'd actually say, I'm not going to use this. Like you mentioned, Bob, that the functionality is impaired, so I want to give it back. That's what it sounds like the definition of a mum is. So if we say that's a defect, and a scratch is not a defect, because a scratch is only something I would exchange while I'm still at the store, but I would never take it home and send it back for a scratch. So
Suppose there's a latent defect. Suppose there's something that's not easily discernible, but over time you discover it.
If you can prove, so you very, very good. This happens in the olden days with animals, and they would slaughter the animal, and they would find out that it's not kosher because there was something internal within the animal that made this animal not kosher. Something wrong with the lungs or something. Animal has to be able to live for a full year to be kosher. So if you find something inside that was going to die in 3 months, so then it was not kosher. So now they have to prove, when did this happen? When did this animal develop that tumor? Sometimes the Chazal, the rabbis, can tell us, you can tell from if it has a scab on it or it doesn't have a scab on it, certain trephos, certain issues with the animal. Sometimes we don't know, and we're not going to know. So we do have to attempt to determine when the defect was there. And if we don't know, then we have always the rule we fall back on called hamotzi mechavero olav haraya, that whoever is holding the item now, whoever's holding the money, for you to extract it from him, the burden of proof is on you.
Yeah,
so
but that's be a premise of the agreement.
Which?
I mean, if I go over to you and I want to buy an animal, and you go and checked it, and it turns out to be treif, and the agreement was you're buying an animal from me, I don't know what you're doing with it. But if the premise of the agreement is I need an animal because I want to eat it and I need it to be kosher, please give me an animal for it to be kosher. You give me an animal that's not kosher, well, now I can go back to you and say I need an animal that's kosher, and you're giving me an animal that's not.
Very good. I skipped. I didn't want to get into that route, but there was many times when you bought an animal, and the Shulchan Aruch explicitly deals with what did you buy it for. Back then, there was two reasons you bought animals. One was to plow, for cows, essentially to plow, or to eat, either to milk or to eat. So sometimes the majority of people bought it to plow. Can you rely on the majority or not rely on the majority? So we're going to leave that aside, because most times you buy a washing machine to wash your clothes and not to eat.
Not to plow.
Huh?
You don't buy the washing machine to plow.
Yeah, no, it won't work so well. So we'll stick to pants and washing machines for now, and cars you want to drive. But you're true, 100%. Yeah, it has to be part of it. In my case, he said I was buying it to eat it. And nobody knows what's happening inside of the animal. You can't know. So you have to determine, when was it there. But that is an important point. When is it there? Okay, so the question is, can the seller sell the item with a scratch? If you don't call that a defect, can he sell it and say, look, it's not a defect, meaning the guy can't return it according to halacha when he takes it home. So can I sell it without telling him? Moral dilemma. So something called gnevas das, where you're not allowed to do something to another person if you know it's information they would appreciate. So you should not be withholding that information from them. You're stealing, essentially. You're stealing their knowledge. You're stealing what they think is true. So you're not allowed to do that. But if you did, in a Jewish court, you would not be able to give back the washing machine, because we'd say that the scratch is not called a mum. It's a machlokes. So okay, everything's going to be ultimately going to be an argument, but that's what the Shulchan Aruch seems to say. So it seems to be that you would not be able to return the washing machine if it has a scratch, but if it has something serious, then you can. Okay. Now we're going to get to the next fun.
But this doesn't exclude that you can't maybe get the money that it's worth between the scratch and dent version and the.
No, you can't get anything if you can't return the item. If it's not called, if society does not call this a defect, there's no such thing as damages in the Torah except for what we're about to discuss now. So, and then there's going to be a question. Let's hold off for 1 second and then we'll apply it. Okay, so in the case that happened about 1,000 years ago, where the guy bought the houses and they were vandalized in the interim, and the deal went through, it was closed. He went to go see the houses and he sees that they were vandalized. Okay, now he says, I want to back out of the deal. This is a defect. This is the material defect. What was the vandalization? It actually says in the story what happened. The walls were blackened from fire. There wasn't a fire in the house, but the fire didn't damage the house, but the walls were blackened. The windows and the windows were broken and the doors were removed. Okay, so you don't have doors, windows, and the walls are blackened. Okay, but the roof is fine, plumbing's fine, whatever. Everything else is okay. But that was the issue. He says, I didn't buy a house that's vandalized, so that's a material defect. Nobody would buy a house if they walked into it and it looked like this, right? So I want my money back. So the seller says, but I'll fix it for you. Those are all external superficial repairs. There's nothing wrong with the house. It's still called a house. That's a house. What's the house worth? $1 million. So now with these damages, it's minus 10,000 to $1 million. It's still a house. That's what it is. It's a house. It's not a broken house. So I'll give you $10,000 to fix it, or I'll fix it for you, or I'll take $10,000 off of the cost of the house, and I made you whole. So who's right? Because what we learned just now is that if it has a defect that's material, and I should mention the Shulchan Aruch says it doesn't matter if it's 10% of the full selling price or 20% or 40%. Any amount that society would say this is considered a defect. So either I have my condition that I can activate now, void or voidable, whichever way you want to look at it, it's void or voidable. But I'm allowed to because society says this is a material defect. I'm allowed to back out of the sale. The sale never happened, or I can nullify it retroactively. Either way you want to look at it.
You're talking about the vandalism occurred before the.
Yeah, so when he bought a house that he thought was good, and it was vandalized. Just like you buy the washing machine, you think it's good, and it's broken.
Vandalized before he bought it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So he wants to get out of the deal. Can he get out of the deal? That's what was asked to the Rush. The Rush is one of the greatest Jewish sages that ever lived, and it was asked to him about 1,000 years ago in Spain. And this guy wants to back out. It's a big, big business deal. So the Rush says, you're not allowed to back out. The seller has the right to fix it. You say, what are you talking about? I'm sure the buyer says, the Shulchan Aruch says right here that if it's a defect, it's material, and society says, I would not buy this house having known that it was vandalized and missing windows and doors. Like no agent would ever be able to sell the house like that, right? So then I can back out. That's what it says. And it says that he can't tell me that he's going to pay a percentage back like we started off with. No, I can nullify the sale completely, and I want to back out now. So the Rush said, no, you're missing something. There's something called a mum over. What's a mum over? It's a defect that can be easily fixed, and the item can be returned to its pristine state. That never said that in the Shulchan Aruch, right? We never saw that until now. Anything I mentioned, and I was mentioning the primary sources. So this is a later source, right? And I mean the Shulchan Aruch was written later, but right? But the Rush didn't have a Gemara that said this, so he doesn't have a primary source in the times of the earlier sages. So where is he getting this from? So he says, no, this is a mum over. You can fix it. But in my cases before, let's say the washing machine, the engine that doesn't work at all, whatever, the motor doesn't work. So the guy says, I can fix your motor. So in that case, even the Rush says, sorry, you can't fix the motor. You can return the item. So what's the difference between a case where the motor is destroyed versus where it's missing doors, windows, and the walls are all black?
I wouldn't have known this, but I think in the way that you said the story, you said that it's still called a bias. It's still called a house. So I'm assuming it has to do with that. Whether or not it has to do with the defect, does it take away from the definition or like the central idea of what the item or the property is? So in the case of an engine, a car, the engine is the heart of a car. That is the car. Like it enables it to move. Whereas in the case of this house, it's superficial things that it still is a structure. It still has all the features of a house. It just has some superficial damage, which could be fixed, which I guess is a mum over. That's what I would think.
Very good, very good. That good deal. You picked up on it. It's still called a house, and that's not called a washing machine. A washing machine, a motor is not a washing machine. It's a big hunk of metal, and then you could put a new motor in it. But that now it became a washing machine. It wasn't a washing machine before. It was a broken piece of metal. So now let's get a little deeper. What's the concept behind that? How do we draw the line? In fact, the Ramah, who paskins like this Rush, who says this case, he says if the wall was messed up, if one of the walls, let's say, was structurally not sound, it's called a koto ru'ua, it wasn't sound, and the guy says, I'll fix the wall for you, sorry buddy, no deal. He's allowed to back out. Even the Rush will tell him you could back out if the wall was shaky, because he says a wall, he doesn't say the exact reason, he just says a wall is called, I'll shame the house. The house is, walls are what give it the name of house. The paint job and the windows isn't what make it a house. Walls make it a house.
I think it goes to the expectations of the parties, what the seller expected and what the buyer expected, especially what the buyer expected when he entered into the transaction. He was expecting to buy a house, with an integral house, and the seller was able to give him that by making these.
But he expected windows. He expected doors.
Right, but the seller is able to give him that by putting in the windows and walls.
No, but what about the walls? Why can't he fix the wall? Because he's going to say, let me fix the wall. I'll get the wall. It'll be better than it was before. I will make this wall better than it was before. I guarantee it. Why can't he fix the wall? So now we have to get one step deeper. Why can't he fix the wall? It's not fair. I'll fix the wall. It'll be better than before. I'll do it I'll do it in 2 hours.
Because if the wall was broken, then it never was a house. But it was a house, it just had the vandalism, and then that could be fixed.
Okay, very good. So the difference is structural or superficial? Structural or superficial, right? If it's structural, it's not a house. If it's superficial, it's a house. It just has things that you need to be fixed, but it's still a house. So you sold him a house, or you did. And if it's structural, you didn't sell him a house. What would you say about plumbing?
I would say the same thing, it's not a house.
Which one? Plumbing is structural.
I think probably the time is
Depends on what area.
Yeah. Now plumbing is structural. So the guy says, "I'll fix the plumbing." You can't fix the plumbing.
To one
You can back out.
extent, say if one toilet's broken, you get a plumber for $150 and you fix it. It's done.
Yeah, that's my question. There's going to be a big gray area. What about air conditioning? The central AC is totally busted. He has to fix it. Is that?
Probably.
Yeah, I think in Florida. Is that called a house? Nobody can live in Florida without an AC. But it's still a house. The walls are fine. The foundation's fine. Is it called a house without air conditioning, or without plumbing?
You
Today?
can't live in it, so it's not really a house. The intention of a house is to be able
But
to occupy it.
there are houses that don't have central AC, whereas there's no such thing as a house that doesn't have walls or a roof.
Well, I mean, it doesn't have central AC, but it has AC. You know, if you have a house that is designed for central AC and the AC is broken and has to be repaired, I mean, it's a big deal.
So that already sounds like that's, while it may be called a house, it's definitely not the house that I bought.
Yeah, so then I have to fix it. So I still have to fix it. Nobody's saying he would have to fix it. The question is, well, was it a house? Was it a house? And then he has to fix it. So air conditioning I think is going to be a gray area. Plumbing, I think, could be a gray area if you're going to call that still a house.
Well,
And it
it's
just
not
needs to.
habitable.
But either as a house without doors or windows. Back then, why'd you have a house? For protection from the elements and from robbers,
Yeah, but-
animals.
But if you, let's say it's central air conditioning, I mean, it happens to be, I'm facing a problem like this, so you have
He's not gay.
you
Yeah.
have to literally rip apart the ceilings, rip apart, change, penetrate the structural elements of the house. It's a big deal to change the air conditioning. It's a big disruption. It takes months, and the house is different afterwards.
I would agree with Bob. And air conditioning and plumbing, I thought would be structural. So that's my opinion, but I think they can be left up to the Dayan. I mean, I
The
don't.
right for you though is by tenants and landlords when they have the distinction between structural and, because like a tenant is responsible if the toilet gets caught, you don't call a landlord. But if the pipes inside of the wall are messed up, that's considered structural, so.
But windows, who's responsible for fixing for a window that's missing?
If it's missing, it's broken probably.
The door.
Like let's say a
Oh,
rock.
yeah?
If
A
a
door.
rock hit the tenant, I think so. I don't know, I mean, it depends on the contract, but.
Okay, yeah, so that might be a good way to try to back into the definition of what's called a mum over and what's not called a mum over. So that's going to be super duper important when we define mover. Now let's say here's the next layer. Let's say that the seller says, so the buyer says, I want to go back on the deal, and we said the case was where the seller says, no, I'll fix it. Okay, let's say the buyer says, I want you to fix it, and the seller says, no, I'm not going to fix it. You can go back on the deal. I'll let you go back on the deal. You can go back on the deal, but I have no responsibility to fix it. Again, there's no contract that said he has to fix it. And we just said, guess what? We made it sound like it is a house. It's a real house. So he says, if you want to keep the house, you can keep the house. If you want to go back on the house and give it back to me, I'll take it back and give you back your money. The case I said, the first case is where the buyer wanted to back out, and we said he can't back out. And the seller has to fix it because the seller wanted to fix it. He volunteered to fix it. Let's say the seller says, I don't want to fix it. It's not worth my time. Or the house is worth a lot more money than it was when I sold it to you over that last month. It was the middle of COVID, and the house jumped in value. So, give me back the house, and I'm not putting windows and doors on it. I don't feel like it. But I'll let you give me back the house. I'll give you back your money. Does the seller have the right to do that?
I mean, the events would force the seller to go and carry it out.
Yeah, or we're based and say, no, the seller has to go fix the house. You sold him the house. What would you say?
That's really not
You said there's no damages, that would be damages. I
What do you mean?
meaning you're saying that if it's not sufficient to be a material defect that you can return it, Allah has nothing to say about the situation, right? That's the claw. If it's not a material enough thing that you have to return it.
Yes.
So then here, if it's not material enough, then.
But it is material, the seller has to fix it.
No, the buyer.
No,
No,
only
the
if the
buyer. It's
seller
not.
wanted
The
to.
buyer can't back out. Yes, it's
Right,
not material
right.
enough for the buyer to back out.
Right,
So
but
the seller.
has to also fix it.
That's if the seller wanted to keep the deal alive. But if the seller wants to go out of the deal and he doesn't want to fix it, can we force him, or can he let the buyer out of the deal? He's letting the buyer out of the deal. The first case was different. The buyer wanted out.
But if the buyer wants to go forward, the seller has to fix it.
Or he can give back the money. It
you're
should be,
thinking
or he
that
can give
there's
back the money.
damages.
There's nothing. It's a house. I gave you. We signed up for a house. I gave you a house. Halacha says I gave you a house. If you want to, right? If I want you to keep it, I have to fix it. But if I want to take it back, I'll take it back. Give it back.
Right.
Give the house back. I'll give your money back.
Well, if the buyer and the seller agreed to nullify the deal, then
No.
yes.
No, the
doesn't.
buyer wants to
Buyer
keep
wants
it.
to
But then the seller has to fix it.
Okay, so let's go now one step deeper. Maybe we'll end with this because I think we're already at 2.
This is property. Property is a little bit different because it's not just the house that he's buying. He's also buying the positioning of where the house is. So it'd be very difficult for the seller to come out afterwards and say, "Oh, well, just I'm not going to fix it, but give me back the house." Well, it's not just the house. It's the positioning. It's the area.
He's going to give it all back. Whatever.
But that's
He's gonna
what
give it all
he
back.
No, but that's what he wants.
Who wants?
The buyer wants the positioning. He wants
Yeah,
the
so he
area,
gets to keep
wants-
it. Good, yes, he gets to keep it. And the seller
Right,
says.
but it should be at the seller's expense because it wasn't what they agreed on originally.
Okay, but he says, okay, so I'll give you back your money. That he can he have the recourse to say, fine, so let's nullify the deal. Halacha doesn't usually say that you have unless there was specific language in the contract, that you have right to damages. We said the whole concept of mekach tos is it never happened. You want to exercise your right to nullify the deal? Exercise it. Or say that this wasn't the house you wanted to buy? Okay, I'll give you your money back. I don't have it. No, there was nothing that we learned up until now that you can force me to rectify the situation. You can nullify the deal. You have that right. Can he say that? So we'll end with this, and it really depends on how you look at mum over, this case where I can fix it, and it's not called a structural issue; it's called a superficial issue. Now, it's very subtle. So, is it that we don't call this a mum, which I think how Josh said it, that we say this is not called a defect because it's superficial, which means that what happened, the deal went through because it's still called a house. It's not called a defect. And if the deal went through, then you can't force me to you can't force me to paint it and to put back the windows. Because the deal went through. If you want to go back out of it, I'll let you back out of it. But the deal went through. I said I would deliver a house. I delivered a house. This is not called a defect because it's superficial. It's not structural. I delivered a house, and therefore you have to keep it. I don't have to fix it. That would be one way to look at it. Or do we say, what's the understanding of a mum over? Is that really this is a defect. Really this is a defect, but it's rectifiable. I can fix it without having to make it a new house. This is what the Nesiba says. The Nesiba says, what's the reason that a wall that's not structurally sound will nullify the deal? Even if I can fix it and make it perfect. I can make the wall better than it was ever, better than before. Why can't I do that? Because it's a new wall. It says, Panim chadashos ba'olakan. This is not the house that I bought. It's a new house. You sold me a different house. It might be even a better house. But it's not the house that I bought because a structural change means this is a new house. It just gave it a new house. Gave it a din of a new house. So if you look at it like that, where that the sale did not go through, the sale did not really go through because it is a mum, right? This is a mum, right? If you let's try to follow this through, okay? That he can rectify it without changing it into an object. Without changing it into an object. Can anyone fill in the blank here? I wrote here, if it is a mum and it's just that he can fix it, then if he refuses to fix it, it becomes a mekach tas. Okay, that was the first thing. If you refuse to fix it, then the transaction never went through. But if the transaction went through and the deal was final, right, and it's not considered a mum, then the deal is final, then the seller would have to fix the defect because the deal did go through, and now he sold you something that he has to actually back up what he sold you. He has to make sure that the deal went through. It's not where you can nullify the deal. I gave you a house.
Because the deal was for a house that had windows and doors.
Yes, exactly. And the deal went through. Yeah, and the deal went through.
Why
Exactly.
can't
That's
you
it.
say
Yeah.
So why can't you say mekach tos? I'll give you your money back.
Because the deal went through. Because the deal went
Yeah,
through.
the deal didn't go through. It's mekach tos. There's no windows.
No, but we said the deal went through. In this understanding,
Well,
the deal went
The
through.
buyer's forcing the seller.
Yeah, to fix it.
Then
Then he can fix it because the deal went through, and now the seller has to actually rectify the damage that was done. When was the damage done? In the seller's domain. It was when the seller owned it. It was before closing. So now the seller has to make sure to deliver the house that he meant to deliver because the sale went through. The question is, did the sale go through or not?
So we're coming out with basically is that they both have to be basket in order to make it a mekach tos to nullify the sale. They both have to agree. Is that what you're saying?
No. We're saying the buyer.
You're saying that the buyer I'm sorry, the buyer.
The buyer certainly cannot back out. The buyer
the
cannot back
terms.
out unilaterally. The buyer cannot back out unilaterally. The seller has the option to fix it or not. The question is, can the buyer force the seller to fix it?
So you're saying
According to
that-
one understanding, he can, yes, force the seller to fix it because the transaction did go through, and now he has to make good on the transaction.
So in order for them to nullify the sale, they would both have to agree. Because you said the buyer can't unilaterally back out, and the seller can't unilaterally back out.
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
Yes,
The
yeah,
buyer
yes,
would, the
that's
buyer
what
would
it
have to agree. Well, yeah, the seller would force him into it and twist his arm and say, I'm not going to fix it. Yeah,
Meaning the
I'm not
novelty-
going to fix it.
The novelty of mum over is that it allows the deal to be perpetuated, but it also has a requirement of having to be fixed. So we said either in mum we had two ways to look at it. Either the deal didn't go through, or it went through and it's not fixable, you don't get damages.
Yeah.
The concept of mum over introduces this notion that the deal went through, but you still have a requirement to fix it.
The two ways to look at it is the move over is when did the deal go through. One way to look at it is it went through when we at closing, and now I have to fix it, or it only goes through once I fix it. If it only goes through once I fix it, then there's no deal on the table, and I don't have to fix it, because the deal never happened. The deal only happens if I choose to fix it, right?
So you're saying that the seller does not have to fix it?
On that side. If you understand it like that, it depends how. Then now I'm saying it right. Right? That's how you understand it. If you understand it that the deal never went through and it only goes through once I fix it, then it's my choice to fix it or not. Because if I don't fix it, then the deal never went through. So I give you back your money, you give me back the house because it never went through. If the deal did go through, right? Because and it's not called the defect, then I do have to fix it. And I do have to fix it because I said I was going to deliver this house. The deal went through, and I have to make sure that the house that I delivered is according to. I mean, you could argue within that world if he has to fix it in that
Right,
world.
I thought we said if the deal went through,
but the
you
minchas
can back out or not. That's your two recourse. That's the only recourse.
No, if the deal what?
If the deal went through, so back out, but not that you could fix it.
No, in this case, the minchas says you force him to fix it because the deal went through, and now he has to ensure that the house was in the condition that he promised. But the deal, once a deal goes through, he has to ensure that he delivers what he promised. If the deal didn't go through, he could tell you, take your money back.
What are you charging for? It's damage or it's just the bashakatircha? What is the?
You have to pay him to make the house back to what it was when he agreed to buy it. So you have to pay him back to make it whole, almost like damages.
So it's like damages.
And in fact, the buyer doesn't even have to use the money to fix it. He can actually just pocket the money if he wants, even in these cases. Any case of mum over, he has the right to pocket the money if he so chooses, which happens very often. Right? The guy says, I'll take the money back and I'll take the discount and I'm not going to fix it, and he leaves it the way it is. Okay, let's just plug it back into the cases we discussed, and I'll tell you how the halachas actually came out. So, okay, in the case of the pants, I honestly, I'm going to have to come back for that one because we didn't discuss the rest of the second page. That's going to need some more tools to answer that question. What happens if someone damages it in between? That we didn't discuss. I think we're out of time, right? I imagine. No? So okay, fine. It's fine. So we can answer this question. Okay. I think everybody already said the answer. You guys guessed the answer. The Shulchan Aruch says that if you take the cow, right, and you slaughtered it, and then you found that there was something inside of it that made it not kosher. So you want to give it back to the seller. The seller says, okay, give back the cow, I'll give you back your money. And he gives it back and he said, the cow's dead. What am I supposed to do with it now? Right? At least if it was alive, I'd use it for plowing, but now it's dead and it's not kosher, so I can't do anything with it. So can he return the cow and force the seller to give the money back? So we say in that case, yes. Why? Because he was allowed to shecht it, because the derech of an animal that was sold to eat, and it was sold to eat, is you're allowed to slaughter it. So even though he caused damage with a knife and he slit its throat and killed it, he's allowed to do that because that's normal. It's normal to do that. It's a derech to do that. But if he did something to the cow, like he bought the cow for plowing, and then he decided to chop off its tail or to break its leg for some reason,
or even shechted to eat it.
Or even shechted to eat it for an animal that was sold for plowing, which is not normal to do for this type of animal. So then he still can nullify the transaction because the defect was there, but he has to pay the seller for the damages. So give back the dead body, pay back the difference, or just deduct it from the money that has to get paid back to the buyer, and that's how they would be made whole. So it depends on if it's normal or not. Okay. Now the case of the Gemara, let's see if you can get a different case. That was the case with the cow where it was an internal defect. Now plug it into the case of the pants. Should the buyer be able to return these pants that he hemmed?
Yeah, it's normal to hem pants.
It's normal to hem pants.
Although it's not an internal defect. It's
Yeah,
not
but
like
it kind of- but-
Very good.
Unlike the animal, where it was latent, you couldn't discover it unless you slaughtered the animal. With the pants, all he had to do was check the pants out, and he would have been able to return them.
That's what Josh is saying. Yeah. The tailor doesn't know.
the tailor gave him a size 32.
He thought it was your
and
kid's
said
pants
to
also.
hem them to one size.
You tell your
And then-
tailor what size it is?
Tailors don't
No,
look at the
meaning-
sizes.
meaning
No,
the
the
tailor-
it's not the tailor's a stranger to the contract.
No, I'm talking about independent, but I guess it's outside the
Have
scope.
another a cross claim against.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking. I mean, if you say, here's my size 32 pair of pants. Hem these ones to the same length, so it's obviously for the same person.
You tell the tailor
Somebody who's-
the size that you bought.
But you
or
expect
say-
you expect them to
Sellers
look
don't
at-
look at they look at the bottom of the leg of the pants. They don't look at the waist.
I think that
They
goes
they
to
ignore the
tailoring.
waist. I don't know. I think they ignore the waist and they look at the bottom. So if
It depends. If you go to the tailor and the tailor says try it on, I'll measure it, and you try it on, it doesn't fit, then you have to, you could return it.
yeah, but you didn't
But
try
if
them
you
on.
give it to the tailor and say, look, I want it the same length as these pants, and the tailor marks it off with the other pants, then you can't return it.
What if the tailor thought it was kind of? He's like, he admits it. Yeah, I was gonna call you. I noticed that it was different, but whatever. I figured you knew what you were doing.
Yeah, the tailor's allowed to assume whatever. I don't think the
He's
tailor is going to be
obligation.
called negligent because he gets pants. He closes his eyes and he does what he's supposed to do. Right? That's how the tailor does. He's not looking at who's going to wear this. Is it going to look like? So that's one. So the Prisha says, like you guys just said. He said the only case where if you damage it and it's normal to damage is where you couldn't discern the defect when you shechted the animal, when you killed the animal. It was internal, but if it's external, then it's your responsibility that before you take a knife to something, whether it's a pair of pants or the neck of an animal, you have to make sure that this is the right thing before you take a knife to it. And if there's something wrong with it, you have to give it back beforehand. However, the Nesivos argues, and he says it depends what's normal. Is it normal that before you give back, you give pants in, that you check every single one or you try every one on? Or can you rely on the store that 90% of the time, or 99 even, they give you the right size? When you say, give me 5 more of the same size, most people look and say 32, here you go. And therefore, it's not normal for a person to check every pair of pants on the tag. And it's not, the onus of responsibility is not on the buyer to check every pair of pants before he hems them. Nobody does that. Nobody really does that. So then it's not normal. So it's not his responsibility. So it comes out to be a machlokes, that can we apply it to the case of the pants? Because the case of the pants is not like the case of the cow, because it's an external defect that could be seen and determined before you actually took the knife to the pants. So therefore, we say hamotzi mechaveru olav araya, and who's holding the money right now? The seller. So now the buyer cannot extract the money because the seller can say, I'm relying on the opinion that says that you should have checked it. I'm relying on the opinion of the Prisha that says you should have checked it and you didn't check it. So if you want to extract money, the burden of proof is on you, and you don't have all the opinions on your side. I have a major opinion on my side, so you cannot take the money out of me. So you don't have to give back the pants.
Can you say I'll do it and I'll pay the damages?
Do what?
Give me my money back, but I'll pay the difference between ham and pants.
You could try to, if the
Because, I
guy's a
mean,
nice guy.
I feel like I'm saying I feel like hem pants is not the same thing as a slaughtered cow.
But he doesn't have to. He doesn't. If you want to
Okay.
negotiate, yeah, he can. And you all can always do whatever you want.
Oh, that's the thing I was,
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, al pi halacha, you can't force him. You can't force him to take back the pants and deduct the difference. No, because he damaged the pants, and the seller says, I don't have to take them back. I don't want to deal with selling hemmed pants. That's not the business I'm in. Selling hemmed pants, pre-hemmed pants. So that's going to be machlokas. Okay, so we answered case number 1. Case number 2 was the case with the houses that had smoke, the missing doors and windows, and we said that the sale does go through, and the seller has to fix it if he so chooses. If the seller does not want to fix it and says, give me back the house, so that is going to be a machlokas between the minchas. It depends how you look at mum over as this repairable mum. Is it something where the transaction actually did go through and then he has to fix it, or did the transaction not go through until it's fixed, in which case he can nullify it as long as it hasn't been fixed yet? That would also answer our question number 3, which happens all the time. The builder builds a house, property value went up, and there are defects in the house, and the buyer says repair them, and the seller says no. I don't feel like it. All my workers went home. I'm not going to repair them anymore. So he says, and if you don't like it, give me back the house. I'd be happy to take back the apartment. So can he do that? So that's also this machlokes. It's a mum over, and can you force the seller to repair it or not? That's going to be a dispute whether you can force him to repair it or not. So I guess it would depend on the base din you went into and the arguments that you made. And usually, again, these are going to be spoken out in a contract. And if it's a halachically enforceable contract, so the guy's going to have to repair it. Almost every time you buy a house on paper, it says that there's 1 year where you can force the seller, the contractor, to fix everything, and that's exactly what happens, and everything works out. But if you didn't, So then we go to Beis Din, and this is what we would discuss.
But wouldn't there be a difference because in that case the seller is putting the mum in place? I mean, he's making the mum by putting the mismatched cabinets. He's the one who put it there in the first place.
That's a very good point. Is that called damage? Are you damaging? Are you a mazik? Are you damaging?
It's a literal story. It's a hat. So
Yeah.
Why is that?
Yeah,
Why
it's
is it
the-
not the same thing as the pants?
Why is it not? No, because you're the seller.
No. The seller's the one who made the mistake. Yeah, not
Yeah,
not
the
the
seller's
buyer.
the one who made the mistake that keeps
No,
the
the
pants.
pants. The damage was made by the buyer. He had
No,
them.
I mean if.
Yeah, the seller has to give it back for
in-
sure.
In that case,
By the pants,
The pants not a
the
yes.
seller gave him 4 pants that are different size.
It's not a mum over though. It can't be fixed. He and then the buyer damaged the
And the buyer
pants.
did, right.
Damaged pants. Here nobody damaged the house after.
I mean,
First of all, the
because
buyer
if
didn't
you-
damage it.
If you say that you just take it or leave it, then you're incentivizing sellers to switch out the cabinetry.
Or you're
so that people want to.
Or they just don't finish.
Or-
so they can get the property back and resell it. for
Or
more.
you're incentivizing buyers to get lawyers like you guys to write up contracts. So none of these things should be left
Right.
open-ended, because if it is left open-ended, he might be up the creek. There's real cases where this happens, and the contractor says, "No, give me back the house." And of course, he's not giving back the house, and he has to take the loss. He has to suck it up and get the cabinets fixed, or live with mismatched cabinets. But at the end of the day, it's still called a house, right? It's still a mum over. Everybody would agree that the house is called a house. Mismatched cabinets doesn't take away the fact that it's a structurally sound house. So that's what it would come down to.
Yo,
Any questions?
if they mismatched cabinets, they may have mismatched other things.
Yeah.
Yo.
Never know.
So wait, so really there is damages in Nullify. You're saying, I mean, here, this situation, there were damages to make up the difference.